Thank you all for being here today to honor and celebrate the life of Robert Baskin Rosen. At this time, if you have any electronic devices, cell phones, or pagers, please place them on silent. We are extremely honored today to have both Rabbi Frederick Reeves from KAM Isaiah Israel and Lev Friedman, who was Robert's brother-in-law, who will be officiating at our service today.
Also co-officiating is our cantor, David Berger. This time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever-new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, in light and in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. We listen to the words of Psalm 23 as set by Max Janowski. beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, and my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We are here to remember Robert Rosen. One of the things that I've learned about Robert is that he was a man of many names. I knew him as Bob, other people knew him as Rob, some knew him as Robbie, even Grandpa B. But the Bob that I knew was a student of Torah. A few years ago, he started coming to Torah study on Saturday mornings here, and I was always delighted when I saw his tall frame cross the threshold, because I knew that he would bring his sharp mind, critical thought, and bright smile to whatever it was that we were studying that day. His children have described him as elegant and earthy, a cowboy and a gentleman. Those words capture him so well, because they contain both the humility and the adventurous nature of his spirit together. Robert was born on May 8, 1943, here in Chicago. His parents were first-generation Americans. Their parents had immigrated to this country from Poland and Belarus. He was the oldest of 4 children, and he started life in a small apartment in West Rogers Park. They were cramped there. Not only was Robert's family large for the space, but there were countless cousins and members of extended family who were constantly around. But that gave a feeling of closeness and comfort to Robert. While it was a time of economic hardship for his family, Robert remembered those years as formative, both in his sense of place in life and for his sense of the importance of family. When he was 8, the family moved to Highland Park. They were on an upwardly mobile track, and the family did what they could do to fit in that suburban environment. But the suburbs never felt quite right to Robert. And when he looked back, he could feel a sense of rupture between his life in West Rogers Park and his life in Highland Park. He felt that as the oldest child, there was pressure put on him, and that led to a sense of anxiety of obligation throughout his life. Now, his sense of responsibility was such that he did live up to those obligations. But they were quite acute sometimes and were expressed in different ways. It's also the case that the move away from the close-knit family that lived among the apartment buildings to the isolated, if large, houses and yards of the suburbs gave Robert a sense of rupture between those phases of his life, and he developed this great sense of nostalgia for that family closeness. As a result, throughout his life, being close to family was the most important thing for him. Yes, he was proud of his children's accomplishments, of course, but he was more proud when he saw them prioritize their family, when they would sit together all at a Shabbat dinner and say blessings together and feel that closeness. Now, I don't want to give the impression that his youth was not fun. He enjoyed the outdoors, he was a Boy Scout, a tennis and basketball player, and he laid the groundwork for many hobbies that he would develop later in his life. As he grew older, he went to Brown University and then to Northwestern to pursue an MBA. And while he was there, he joined the Air National Guard, where he developed a real love for aviation. During that time, Robert was able to return to his beloved city. He and his brother Larry shared an apartment. One evening in 1967, Larry met a girl at a friend's engagement party. He and this girl, Ellen, went on a date, and afterwards ended up back in the apartment. And Robert and Ellen met briefly, and afterwards Larry said that, if Rob wanted to date her, that was fine, he could have her. Robert called her up, they had a really nice date, but there were certain life complications that kept getting in the way. And And they would have a date every now and again, but a few years would go by. And then one day, Robert told his children that he was walking around O'Hare, trying to remember the name of that really interesting girl that he had dated. And when her last name popped into his head rather, he called her, and they got serious. They started seriously dating in 1969 and were married in 1971. How can one describe 46 years of marriage? The ups, the downs, the good times, and the bad. There are not words to fully express the love that they share. Robert said that Ellen was the most interesting person that he had ever met, and he had never had a dull moment with her. On a side note, I will mention that Rabbi Arnold Jacob Wolf performed their marriage. He had been the rabbi of their congregation up north as they were growing up. And then once Rabbi Wolf returned to Chicago in 1981 to serve as the rabbi of KAM Isaiah Israel, Robert knew that there was only one synagogue that he was going to be at. And so they were members here for a very long time. Of course, there is so much more to say about Robert. His business career, his children, his beloved grandchildren. And we have a number of speakers this morning who will address those different sides of his life. To begin, we're going to welcome his brother-in-law, Lev Friedman, to the beamer.
As the rabbi said, Rob was known by many names. And by any name, he will be very much missed. Rob passed away during the week in which we read the section from the book of Genesis called Vayechi, which means, and he lived. It speaks of the end of the life of the patriarch Yaakov, Jacob, and how he blesses his children before his death. Rob certainly was the patriarch of the Rosen clan. In a short while, we'll hear from his and Ellen's children and his siblings and others about some of the many ways in which he lived and how he blessed them. He's being buried during the week when we read Vayera from the book of Shemot, Exodus, when God and Moses first meet, and God says to Moses, I appeared Vayera to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and I established my covenant with them. From many conversations with my brother-in-law, I know that Rob felt totally Jewish in his kishkis, in his guts. He was part of that covenant. He loved Jewishness and learning about the tenets of Judaism and felt himself to be a part of the long chain of our people's history. In this same portion, the Torah tells of God's hearing the plight of the Israelites in Egypt. The Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim, which means tight places or ravines. God tells Moses that he intends to free the Israelites from the affliction of their slavery. Rob courageously faced the tight place of his disease head on. And we may take some comfort from the fact that he's been released from that constriction into a wider expanse. Ecclesiastes tells us that there's a time for everything, and for everything its season. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to weep and a time to laugh. Ecclesiastes makes the claim that we will have time enough for all the seasons enumerated in that passage of the Hebrew Bible. I disagree. I believe the Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai gets it right when he says, a man doesn't have time enough to have a time for everything. Rather, sorrow and joy have to share the same moment. We are heartbroken that the outcome we all hoped and prayed for did not come to be. Rob wanted to be here to continue in his life as a loving husband to Ellen, father to Rebecca, Molly, and Zach, and to revel with Ellen in the joy of grandparenting Roxy, Simon, Sonny, and Coco. We are forced to face our loss and to do as the poet gently instructs us. We will have to allow sorrow and joy to share the same moment. The tremendous sorrow that this loss brings, the grief that will ride over us in the days, months, and years to come when we miss his handsome, smiling face at family gatherings, when we don't see him reel back at the punchline of a good joke or being engrossed in great conversation about Jewish or other history. I personally will miss his delight in taking in a new insight. He loved learning. And we can take joy in our wonderful memories and turn them into sustained blessings. His love, especially for Ellen, his wife and soulmate of 46 years, his children, grandchildren, and his siblings, Larry, Richard, and Joyce. As his brother-in-law, his only and favorite one, I can tell you that he was generous and kind, and that we enjoyed laughing together and drinking good scotch together. He also taught me a thing or two about what it means to be a father and a provider. I will miss him very much. As the rabbi said, we're going to hear from a number of people this morning. I'd like to invite up Michelle Worley, who worked with Rob at the MPN Foundation, and Eric Kubi, his basketball and tennis buddy, is on deck.
Hello. I first met Bob when he had already pretty much retired from his real estate ventures, when he had gone to form the MPN Research Foundation that exists to fund research that was supposed to save his life and the lives of the other people living with blood cancer still. He had already formed a strong partnership with Barbara Van Heusen, who was the president of the foundation. And so for a while, Bob and I would kind of circle around each other, not quite sure what to make of each other. But then eventually realized that we had some camaraderie, we had some things to bond over. He would have great conversations with me and the other staff about food and Chicago politics and history. And those were moments that we cherished, and we look back, and even if we didn't agree in the moment that he maybe was right about some insight, as young people will do, we're still kind of, those reverberate through us now and recognize that maybe he was right about that. And anyone who's worked with Bob knew that if we were going to go somewhere together as a team, that it was going to have to be at least 5 to 10 minutes you wanted to tack on to that walk, because he was going to spend that time pointing out every historical detail in the city, tell you about this and that real estate developer, people we'd never heard of, but who he'd run into in his past life as a real estate developer. So it was kind of like there was a one-man architectural tour that you got. And spent time with Bob Rosen, which was really, it was such a pleasure. And it's been such a pleasure to get to know Ellen and see the love that they have for each other, and it's an inspiration, and how he is with his family. Bob was my boss, he was my friend, he was my mentor. He taught me so much about integrity and how to stand up for what's right, even in a very difficult moment. I watched him practice the art of the strategic interruption. So many times we've been in meetings where someone was dancing around the answer to a question that he wanted, not just for himself, but for all of the MPN patients that he was there to represent, that we were there to help. And I've seen him fully stop discussions among scientific panels that he was not sitting on to make sure that they clarified a point that he wanted to get some consensus on, because that was our job. There was a purpose to our meetings. It was not just for fun. And there's a purpose and intent to what we're doing at the foundation still. So at the foundation, since we've shared the news, we've been fielding comments from hundreds of people around the world who in some way were touched by Bob, by not just him personally, but by what he has done at the foundation in trying to save the lives of people around the globe. They're people who are patients, they are people who are leading pharmaceutical companies, they're people in the FDA. All of them knew him as a kind man, but also as the man who had hope and optimism for the future. He lived a life of purpose. Through starting the foundation, he changed the very paradigm for what an MPN patient could even expect from their future. He gave them a reason to hope for something better than what they had as options at that time. So to Bob, I think we can say rest in power. It falls to us now to keep his legacy going. We have to ask the questions and try to get the answers, and we have to try to realize those better outcomes for all of the people who are living with this blood cancer that he didn't even get to live to see.
Come meet Bob Rosen. He plays basketball too. That was how we were introduced. And that was the beginning of an incredible friendship of almost 35 years, over 1,000 basketball games, and hundreds of tennis matches. Bob was a gifted athlete, and he loved to play basketball and tennis. I'm sure he would have enjoyed the recounting of 2 of his basketball championships. The first was back in the 90s, at a tournament at DePaul. Even though he was probably pushing 50 years old at the time, Rosen was unstoppable. Since our third player happened to be a pro, 6'7" center, playing professionally in Switzerland at the time, this unshackled Rosen from the role of the post where he usually was stuck. So then he went off on his best Bill Bradley imitation, draining one 15-footer after another all day long. The last was just a few years ago when Bob made a free throw to take our 3-on-3 team into the Standard Club championship game after I had missed mine. You need to follow through when you shoot your free throw, he teased me with that twinkle in his eye. Our regular game recently has been at Thursday's lunch at the Standard Club, where half the roster was 20 and 30-year-olds. Bob reveled in the connection the game provided him with the younger crowd, as well as the physical challenge of competing with people half his age. And the younger crowd loved and respected him. To quote young Mike Mintz, "Good hook shot, great teammate, a better man." Often after a game, I would get a call. "The chief is on the phone," or "Kareem would like to speak with you." So for those non-basketball fans here, the Chief and Kareem are legendary 7-footers from the NBA. And on the Standard Club scale, Rosen was 7 feet tall. Bob would call to praise the other players in the game. Barry made some great passes. I love playing with Lonnie. He's always in the right spot. Ches is such a smart player. Karis made some incredible shots. Fred is so strong. I would remind him of a key rebound or shot or block that he had made, but it was never about his own great plays because Bob was all about making the people around him better. And he rejoiced in it. The same can be said about Bob in the world of business. When Peter Gottlieb and I started our company, Bob was the same supportive teammate, always offering great advice and doing it with such enthusiasm that we felt that he was enjoying it as much as we appreciated his help. His main message was that our integrity was our most important asset. Bob was fiercely competitive, and he loved to win. But playing fair was more important than victory. To use a tennis analogy, Bob never made a questionable line call, even at match point. which is rare. Address every situation from the other person's point of view, and great things will follow. He not only advocated that principle, but he lived by it. Bob Rosen was a true champion on and off the court. He'll be dearly missed. I'm Mike Guy. I'm Bob's son-in-law, and he was one of my dearest friends. I guess we'll start with a story. There are a lot of stories about Bob I think we're going to hear today. I don't call him Bob, I call him Robert. Particularly one summer, a couple of years back, I was convoying with Robert and Ellen from South Haven to Chicago with my family. We were all in the car. I think Shapiro's were there as well. We were on our way to Chicago and eventually to a Grateful Dead show where I just was discussing in a back room. Robert was almost accidentally thrown out because he had wandered into Bob Weir's dressing room. And he was, Peter managed to talk him back in. Anyway, as we were driving back, we were heading south on Interstate 196, following when he pulled off the interstate, somewhere in Indiana, I think. And it was, there was a gas station that he pulled in, sort of a random, kind of dirty gas station, and we all pulled up to the pumps, and as I was filling my pump, I looked over my shoulder, and Robert was walking up to me. He was wearing his summer hat, this really unfashionable wide-brimmed hat, and a wide smile, and he was holding this greasy cardboard box full of fried fish, and he said, "You have just got to try this perch." And so I put the pump back on in the gas station pump and tried the perch, and it was in fact delicious. Robert Rosen was a man of great enthusiasms. Over the past week, I've been replaying one conversation after another that I had with him about flying, cars, family, politics, health, science, Harry Truman, Heaven on 7th, about the pride he took in the generous selection of aftershaves in the men's locker room at the Standard Club, and about his 3 children, about a fabulous Peking duck he may have just eaten somewhere in Chicago. But when I think of that greasy box of perch or the aftershave, what sticks with me isn't the goofiness of this 6'6" tall fella in a silly hat carrying fried fish around. I think about the pleasure that he took in sharing with other people. And it was a quality that I think that everybody here recognizes. We've heard a lot of it so far. It was a really rare form of love, of sharing with other people. That's just one side of him. I think a lot of people in Chicago remember him as a man who battled his way to the top of the city's rough and tumble industrial real estate world in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The side of him I never knew. He was hired by a firm called Bennett and Conweiler and was mentored by the legendarily tough Marshall Bennett. It was a really competitive world. It was a dog-eat-dog world, and he was very much Bob in that world. He was an early striver, and he was an innovator in industrial real estate in Chicago. I talked to Robert about those days, mostly because I have trouble reconciling the sweet, thoughtful Grandpa B that my children know with this tough guy from Chicago's real estate world. He said to me once, "Listen, those were different times. I was a different person. As far as I remember it, it was war." And he said it with a smile. I mean, I think it was a different world for him at that point. He stayed at Bennett and Conweiler until the early 80s and switched gears and moved to Frame Commons and Swartchild, FC&S. Here, was seeing more of the Robert that I knew.
A couple of years ago, Rob had me play golf with Ron Frame, the firm's founder. The two are very close friends, and Rob wanted us to meet and enjoy each other's company. Ron told me a few choice stories about him. He said when Bob came into FCNS, he had a reputation for being very aggressive. But I played basketball with him. I knew he was a team player, and he became a truly important mentor to countless younger associates. He joined the firm when there were 10 people, and when the firm was sold, there were 150, and all of them felt the presence of Bob Rosen in their life. He was a mentor to each and every one of them, a huge impact in their careers. I don't know anything about industrial real estate in Chicago, but he played the same role in my life and in the lives of so many others, mostly because he was the voice of reason. We counted on him for counsel in really difficult times, and he always accepted that responsibility, and he did it with wisdom and grace. That was, the night that Robert died, New York City was socked in by a meteorological anomaly called a bomb cyclone. Rob would have appreciated the drama outside the hospital. He and I had a long-standing competition over whose weather app had a more complex set of metrics. After Ellen, Becca, Molly, Zach, and I said goodbye to him for the last time and left his room, we were in a pretty deep state of shock. Such a vital force in all of our lives had so quickly passed through our fingers. Walking through the snow and wind, I thought about a story that Rob used to tell me about flying. He was a big aviation guy. Each time he told it to me, because I would ask him about it all the time because it was terrifying and fascinating, he would tease out a new strand of wisdom that he would convey to me in a way that wasn't patronizing. When Robert was a very young man, he had his pilot's license. This is in the days when anyone with $100 and access to a Cessna could fly one. By his own admission, he wasn't very confident in his skills. His father, Saul, however, had full confidence in his young son. So one day, Saul asked if Robert could fly him and his business partner to a meeting in Decatur. What was he supposed to say? So they went to the little airport in Northbrook. They rented a Cessna 182, what Rob called way too much airplane for me. With Robert at the stick and Saul's young business partner sitting terrified in the back seat, they took off in the general direction of Decatur. Robert said there was radio equipment that would help me navigate, but I didn't trust my skills in interpreting what it would say to me. So I just kept a very accurate map on my lap. He flew carefully, and as he arrived over Decatur, he looked down. Somehow the landscape didn't match up with what he was seeing in the map. Trying to conceal his growing panic, he flew in vague circles for a while. He didn't want his dad to notice. Finally, he saw a massive football stadium down below and realized he'd ended up over Champaign, which missed Decatur by 50 miles in a 90-mile trip. Saul never actually knew what happened. Rob managed to land the plane safely. He said to me, "I never forgot the feeling of being lost, and I stopped flying because of that feeling. I had a lot more to do in my life. I had that sense that I had a lot more to do with my life than mess around in airplanes, and it was an important earlier observation for me. It was also an important early observation for everybody else in this room, everybody who ever met Rob, that we were able to get those years with him. And I'm grateful for each of them, and I'm going to miss him terribly."
Welcome Richard Rosenthal's brother to the meeting. Joyce first. Robson.
I'm Joyce, Robert's baby sister, by 10 years. 20 years ago, when Robbie was diagnosed with Polycythemia Vera, I knew very soon that my blood was a perfect 10 for 10 stem cell match, so that just in case he ever needed a transplant, I would be there for him. When Richie called me around August 30th to tell me it was time, I was ready. With 100% willingness, I prepared. But here's the thing. Robbie, God, and I had a plan. A beautiful and fail-proof plan. Here it is. In the month of December, Shoshana, our daughter, would give birth to our first grandchild. Ellie, my nephew, and Courtney's baby was due the same month. Molly's new book would hit the shelves. And Rob would receive my stem cells in order to be completely reborn into a new life full of vitality and strength. So much birth all at once. What a time in our family, how we will celebrate. In addition, his transplant took place on the 8th day of Hanukkah. More proof of the miracle afoot. A gorgeous package wrapped in a tiny bow. This plan did not account for my beloved brother leaving the world 1 week ago today. How do we make sense of something that has gone so totally awry, so devastatingly, heartbreakingly wrong? When I look back at the last 4 months, I find the answer is in one word: yes. The hundreds of yeses that formed the tapestry of love around Robert were stunning beyond words. The first yes was Rob choosing life last summer, to giving transplant a shot, to wanting more years and believing it was possible. The yes of the entire Shapiro household, graciously and with full hearts welcoming Rob into their home for months while in treatment. The yes of Rebecca lovingly arranging for up to 20 caregivers and managing his every physical need. Of Pete's big heart and generosity of spirit. The yes of Roxy so graciously giving Grandpa B her own bedroom without a key. Of Simon accepting and loving his grandpa to be in his home in whatever shape he was in. The yes of Molly's beautifully written updates to keep us connected and informed of her daily devotion to her dad in a million ways. Sonny and Coco saying yes to their mommy when they've gone so much to care for their grandpa. The yes to Zachary's devoted and attentive loving presence for weeks on end. The yes of our brother Richie's daily attention, the loving brotherly act of fully accompanying him on his journey in every aspect, on every twist and turn. And of Brother Larry's loving and thoughtful phone calls that brought Rob such great joy. Of his beloved Ellen, flying back and forth, and the yes of her wise inner knowing that she had to keep the stability of her life going at home. Yes of Shabbat dinners every week with everyone. Richie, Becca, Mike, and Molly tagged him into countless medical appointments and making sure he was never alone. The yes of thousands of prayers, emails, and texts from all of our friends, families, and communities all over the world, including our Cameroonian sister Rose, sometimes 4 times a day at Mass, praying on behalf of Rob. Lev coming with me for the transplant procedure and his constant support. And of course, the yes of the gift of my numerous and healthy stem cells. All of these and so much more created a web of love that broke all of us open and created a stronger bond than we knew that we had in us. When things go terribly wrong, showing up with a wild yes is really all we've got. Our first grandchild, Abraham, was born just as Rob was losing consciousness just last week. He knew the entire time that his process was connected to this birth. His last text to me was, "Baby?" At his bris just this last Shabbos, in addition to her explanation of his 3 Hebrew names, Shoshana spoke these words to the baby. we also want to honor your great uncle, Robert Rosen, whose Hebrew name was Herschel Meyer, Deer of Light. My Uncle Robbie died just days ago, and he has felt connected to you this whole pregnancy. You will carry his life and light forward. The poet Raymond Carver writes, "And did you get what you wanted from this life? Even so, I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on this earth. A pillar of our family is gone, a deeply good man. In the end, I believe that Robbie knew without a shadow of a doubt that he was truly beloved. And that places him as one of the luckiest men in the world. And I know from the very marrow of my bones how much I love him. And I'll miss him.
Now welcome Richard Rosen, Robert's brother.
First of all, thank you all for coming. And to state the obvious, this really sucks. Really hard. I'm going to confine my remarks to a subject in which I am the world's foremost authority, being Robert Rosen's youngest brother. And you can't imagine how lucky I was to have that role. For someone who's always had one foot planted firmly on the ground, it was a godsend to have a caring older brother with 2 feet on the ground. He had a gift for being in touch with reality. Reliability and responsibility. Qualities so many people struggle to acquire. Just came naturally to them. In today's bro culture, with its bro hugs and its bromances, I was fortunate to have a real brother who was a best friend. And you're probably asking yourselves, how did such a thing happen? One big reason our relationship was so full of love that I didn't think it'd be this hard. So full of love and free of conflict is that Rob was almost 6 years older than I was, and therefore, until I was about 10, it was largely unnecessary for him to acknowledge my existence. We had none of that messy early childhood history to muddy our affections. I date the beginning of our relationship in 1959 when I was 10 and Rob, newly 16, suddenly realized, 1, that he had another brother who loved baseball, 2, that he, Rob, had a driver's license, and 3, that the Chicago White Sox were in the World Series for the first time in 40 years. Rob put these facts together as only he could, and before I knew it, the 2 of us were sitting in the right field bleachers at Comiskey Park, watching the Sox beat the Dodgers 11-0 in the first game of the series. It was the beginning of a lifelong running conversation between Rob and me about sports that, as the years progressed, centered increasingly on our own and very rare triumphs. A game-winning jump shot of Rob's at his regular standard club basketball game, and I use the word jump in its very broad sense, might consume 2 whole minutes of a phone conversation. And certainly one of the things I miss most about not having him here is no longer, I don't mean to be selfish, but it's no longer having a rapt audience for my account of the home run I hit against Proviso East in 1967. Over the years, Rob was a comforting advisor on many matters: career, relationships, filial, financial, and how to handle a mercurial father that we had in common. It was many years before I was able to give him any useful advice, but along the way we shared so much else: a passion for books and briefcases and fountain pens, recipes and food. But you you've already heard something about. No two brothers have ever enjoyed simple food like we did. We should have had our own TV cooking show. Rather, TV eating show. Just a few years ago, when his flight back to Chicago from New York was canceled, we went out for oysters in Manhattan and couldn't stop talking about the experience for weeks. When we got iPhones, we started texting each other pictures of what we were eating at that moment. My own meal with family or friends might be interrupted by a photo of a dozen cherry stone clams on the half shell that he was about to consume 800 miles away. Or perhaps a plate of fried smelts, or the short ribs or bratwurst that he had just cooked in his own kitchen. That's the kind of relationship we had. I'd hold up my phone and say to whoever I was eating with, look what my brother Rob is eating. The food thing really began with a peasant dish that we learned from our paternal grandfather, which we both loved. A plate of chopped anchovies and raw onions drizzled with fresh lemon juice. And I think you have to be descended from shtetl Jews to even be allowed to look at that dish. It became a quasi-ritual for us to make it when we were together and to eat it on crackers with a shot of scotch or schnapps while saying over and over again, anchovies and onions, what could be better? Anchovies and onions was a way we had of honoring our origins, but also indulging our mutual love of history, whether it was our grandfathers, Abraham Lincoln, Grant, Truman, the Middle East, World War II. While he was sick this fall, he became obsessed with the Battle of Britain in 1940 and the role played by the Spitfire and their fighter pilots. We both read the same terrific memoir of Britain's youngest RAF Spitfire pilot, which gave us something to talk about when I could shut him up about the Chicago Bears. As many of you know, and as you've heard, Rob's childhood love of flying began as compulsive making of model airplanes and led to a pilot's license in his early 20s. And there was a memorable day when I was probably a teenager, he was in his early 20s, when he threw me into a little Cessna so he could practice takeoffs and landings for an hour at Sky Harbor Airport in Norfolk, Illinois. We went up and down, and in retrospect, I think he just didn't want to die alone in a small plane accident that seemed imminent. He faced the ups and downs of his illness and treatment as he faced most things with courage, hope, and no illusions. He said to me a few weeks ago that if I delivered a eulogy, he wanted me to say that he had only one regret in life. It's a true story. He said his one regret is that he wished he learned how to dribble a basketball. And he wasn't joking. And the way I think about that is a life lived in which your only regret is that you never learned to dribble is a life very well lived. So here's to Robert and Rosen, who could be better?
And now welcome Robert's daughter, Rebecca, to the lead.
I'm Rebecca Shapiro, Robert's oldest child. The last chapter of my dad's life began on Tuesday, September 10th, when he moved in with me, my husband Peter, and our kids Roxy and Simon, while being treated at Weill Cornell in New York City. Living with my dad as an adult was a tremendous gift, and certainly a most unusual one. While we had some sad and stressful days navigating his illness, most moments were filled with joy, laughter, and meals. We set up shop for him in Roxy's bedroom, and he slept on her hot pink princess bed with his toes dangling off the end, surrounded by butterfly wallpaper as he made a new life for himself. Roxy's hamster Skittles was banished to the bathtub. In between doctor's appointments he had coffee dates, lunch dates, and dinner dates with many old friends. He played checkers and cards with Roxy and reviewed her civil rights unit with her. When his sleep mask would fall off his eyes and land under the bed each morning, he'd summon Roxy to find it. He read Frog and Toad to Simon and played floor hockey with him. He was the sole spectator at the kids' weekly Sunday night wrestling matches. We armed him with a team of experts, which included an acupuncturist, a trainer, a long-distance spiritual healer, an aide, a cook, and a Reiki master. We kept track of his schedule on the dry erase board in our kitchen. He needed to talk, and I needed to listen. We rehashed each decade of his life, the highs and the lows, his ancestors and his dogs. He told story after story, and he cried. Everything brought him to tears. On average, he cried 2 to 3 times a day, as did I. He was a mushball. And he always liked to talk around midnight. I knew that if I came in to say goodnight at that time, we would chat like the Golden Girls. We celebrated 8 Shabbats, 1 Rosh Hashanah, 1 Yom Kippur, 3 birthdays, and 1 Thanksgiving together this past fall. Rob and Uncle Richie watched every Cubs, Bulls, and Bears game that they could find on TV. Rob, Roxy, and I would lie in my bed together watching season 2 of Stranger Things, even though I don't think he really liked it. We shared brunches at coffee shops in Chelsea on the days that he was up for it. I remember him saying, "This is what I'm going to miss most if I don't make it." Nothing in life gave my dad more joy than sitting with his family around a crowded dinner table. On Sundays, we visited Molly and her family for brunch in Brooklyn. We treated my dad like Mick Jagger and waited on him hand and foot. Not a detail was overlooked. He needed something? No problem. 2 slices of French toast at midnight? You got it. When we ran out of his favorite Goya chocolate wafer cookies, he was heartbroken. So we scoured every New York City deli for them and came up empty-handed. The answer? I tormented Goya on social media until they shipped several boxes to me. I made sure the refrigerator was stocked with his favorite drinks. Lemon lime Gatorade, creamy chocolate fudge Orgain, organic red jacket apple cider bottles, as well as organic baby Swiss sliced cheese. Breakfast were a rotation of my French toast, waffles, and French crepes with Nutella and powdered sugar, which he said reminded him of the ones my Nana used to make him when he was little. Each night before bed, he'd yell out, "Beck, what's for breakfast tomorrow?" I never got irritated with him, except for when he'd occasionally burp and refuse to say excuse me. He constantly told me how grateful he was. "I've always had a strong sense of family," he would say. "Regardless of what happens, this has been wonderful." And it was. I could go on forever about my father, but I will only bring up one more thing. Robert was the quintessential jack of all trades, the ultimate Renaissance man, a polymath. His skills included, but were not limited to, roasting a perfect chicken, making waffles for the kids, fixing the roof, growing an urban garden with basil, raspberries, and collards, sewing a pillow out of my Bargello needlepoint, barbecuing a bratwurst, explaining why turbulence won't crash a plane, making homemade pasta, serving as the de facto mayor of any community of which he was a part, communicating with dogs, unclogging a sink or toilet, knocking down a wall, rebuilding a wall, working with wood, and finally, knowing when to end a speech.
Robert's daughter, Mom.
I'm Robert's second daughter, Molly, and thank you guys for coming today. As a child of the 90s who grew up obsessed with Kate Moss and Vogue magazine, my dad and I, from a very early age, butted heads when it came to what we both considered cool. Cool, by the time I was 12 years old, was drenching my hair in Sun-In, painting my nails black, and getting my right ear pierced for the 4th time at Century Mall. Poor Dad. All he wanted back then was for me to join the JV tennis team and read the first 3 books in the original Nancy Drew series. The summer going into 8th grade, I asked him to drive me to Water Tower to see a matinee of the movie Ghost. No way, said Dad. Instead, I ended up repainting the back stairs. Robert loved making us kids wash and repaint the back stairs, and mow the lawn, and clip the grass, and shovel the snow, using, always, vintage tools from the 60s. They were brutal asks of a teen girl whose sole ambition was to get a VIP ticket to the Vanity Fair Oscar party, but Robert didn't care. He had no patience for anything glittery or glamorous, and God damn it, one of his favorite phrases, if his second daughter didn't get her priorities squared away, stat. As much as I spent my formative years dreaming about being heirs to some fancy Hollywood film director, the Rosens, at their core, were never a family of shiny, sparkly things. In fact, just last year, I asked Dad if he had any loose stones lying around so that I could maybe make an heirloom ring for my children. I, of course, meant diamonds or rubies. He thought for a minute and said, actually, yes, I do. Disappeared into his closet and returned with a handful of pebbles from Michigan. To Robert Rosen, hard work was cool. Lack of pretense was cool. Not quitting was cool. Never give up, he would tell me and Becca and Zachary when we were racing each other around the pool. When it comes to business, he'd say, you've got to circulate to percolate. Take the meeting, he'd say. When I first moved to New York after college, I got offered an assistant position at T magazine. But I thought the magazine was dorky, and I told him so at Starbucks on Webster. A job is a job, Molly, he said. Take the job. Side note, I did, and it was the smartest move of my career. He was always giving me advice, my dad, not that I always wanted to take it. We were not a cuddly, sitcom-worthy daddy-daughter duo. He annoyed me, and I annoyed him like that. He was the firstborn son of 4, meticulous, former Boy Scout, businessman, team sport player, and natural leader. I was the second-born, sloppy, lazy, corner-cutting, and fashion sense. Growing up, my sport of choice was shopping for boas at the Salvation Army. I thought my dad was boring, over-organized. Why was everything always planned to a T? His planning drove me insane. Why would anyone need to get to the airport 2 hours early, Dad? I would say. Why do I need to pack 5 long underwear shirts if we are only going on a 2-day ski trip to Wisconsin? While the other kids in the neighborhood were spending their Saturday mornings at ballet, Robert was teaching me how to use power tools in the basement. He would take me to the junkyard or the lumberyard to pick up wood or old machinery that would turn into contraptions for my dolls. He taught me to play catch on the stoop, and he taught me to swim. Of course, I was the only kid at the Y who wasn't allowed to wear water wings. Chicago was cool to my dad. The Bulls, the Bears. Good food was cool. Anchovies, onions, scotch. John Steinbeck was cool. Miles Davis, Thurgood Marshall. Air and Space magazine was cool. My dad didn't care who he knew. He didn't care who made your shoes. The Midwest was cool. Grilling bratwurst by the beach was cool. Biking the California Trail. In Michigan, he taught me to skip stones and find driftwood and sea glass. When Becca and I were teens, drinking beer with the lifeguards late at night on the beach, inevitably and without fail, around 2 in the morning, Dad would appear at the top of the stairs, bleary-eyed and tight white underwear, holding a flashlight, furious, screaming about, "Damn it, girls, time to get to bed now!" All 6'6" of them. When I was 32 years old, there was a lightning storm over the same lake. And we sat in rocking chairs and watched pink streaks light up the sky. I said that night, "I'm sorry I had always been a good daughter to you." And he said, "I'm sorry I had always been a good dad." We both cried. Loyalty was cool to my dad. Old friends were cool. Love was cool. And Mom was cool. "She never bores me," he would say all the time. Just a few weeks back, after he checked into the hospital, we were talking about relationships, and he said, "Your mom is the most interesting person I know." That same day he said, "One of my favorite things ever is sleeping next to her at night. I just can't wait to get home and sleep next to her every night." And when I said that, Dad, a lot of night. You know, Mom sleeps with a satin bonnet in her hair. A lot of times she wears coconut oil. Sometimes in the winter she also wears a turtleneck and 2 pairs of thick socks and her retainer too. Every single night after 46 years, he always loves sleeping next to her. I swear to God, he looked at me, smiled, and without missing a beat, he said, "Yeah." On August 30th this past summer, after experiencing fatigue and high white blood cell counts, my dad, at the urging of his Chicago internist, ordered a plane to New York in the afternoon with a carry-on bag. We had no idea what was in store, only that he was sick and symptomatic and needed to begin prepping for his stem cell transplant immediately. In characteristic Robert Rosen form, he had already shared us on a Google Doc called Death and Taxes, where he laid out his accounts and last wishes, even down to the details of his very funeral. All the organization I had spent my life mocking, all his order and anxiety, I finally registered as a gesture of fearlessness. My father had lived with a potentially deadly blood disease for 20 years, and when the time was right, he looked his death in the face and took care of business. It was perhaps the most generous act of love he could have left us with. And then we waited it. Dad moved in with Becca for 4 months of outpatient chemo. We joked that she was the director of management and operations, and I was chief executive officer of his feelings and motions. "You're my rock, Molly," he told me in the emergency room one night, where we spent 9 hours together dealing with his low pregnancy and weather. I was the one who accompanied him to his doctor's appointments on Thursdays and took the notes and sent reports to friends back home. When he was feeling up for it, we ate lunch in the West Village, walked back home down 7th Avenue. Sometimes he bring his memoir along, a 40,000-word manuscript he spent the past few years writing, and we read it in the booth side by side. We talk nonstop. We talk about my children, Sonny and Caroline, who are named after his mother. We talk about the concept of empathy and forgiveness. We talked about the MPN Foundation, of which I became a board member in 2012, and my business, which Robert had become a partner in. We talked about what was on the other side of the transplant. I pictured us sitting in the sun this summer in Sleepy Hollow. I was sure, post-chemo, that Robert's hair would grow in silver. 2017 was the year that turned your hair white, I would say. It was ironic. After all those years, the uptight dad and the irreverent daughter had become, for better or worse, inseparable. Here's an example of some of our texts over these past couple months. This is Dad's text. "Thank you again, Mom, for shopping for my new iPad case. It was a basket case of fatigue and meds this afternoon. I'm sorry we got into it a little. I slept for over an hour after you left me. You can yell at me all you want, Dad. I'm a very strong woman. I'm sorry you're feeling so crummy. Dad, it's all good. Love you. Dad, missing you. Me, missing you too, but I'll see you tomorrow with a donut in hand. You're my hero, and I love you. Dad,
sleep mask is? Me. I'll ask Becca. We lit Hanukkah candles tonight and said a Shehekinah in honor of you at the temple in Jerusalem, and we said a prayer for your restoration. Thanks. I'll use a folder that thank you for the sleep mask. Happy Hanukkah from Parakeet and Dreidel. Deb, worried that our last conversation ended on an off note. I'm excited for you and all the good preparations that are going on at work, and eager to hear more when you're ready, with more info from a potential investor. Me. It didn't end on an off note at all, Deb. Me. I want you to know that your health and recovery is my #1 priority now. Would you like me to get a referral for another hematologist? Deb. Yes, please. I'm overwhelmed and discouraged. Me. I know you're overwhelmed. I understand. I'm sorry. We will get through this. I'm here for you. I'm on top of everything. Stand by. Deb. Will you have lunch shots with me tonight? Me. Yes. Sorry. My last text to him on December 19th at 9:13 p.m. says, "You there?" Only he wasn't. Not really. We know now that by the time I pressed send, the levels of the adenovirus were high, so high in his blood that I knew the next day he'd be on life support and no longer conscious. And 5 days later, in a life, on a negative bomb cyclone, he would die. On the last day of my dad's life, the cold snow fell hard and fast outside the ICU window, and I stood by his hospital bed and held his hands and rubbed his feet and laughed and cried and played music and remembered. And most of all, I said thank you. The story of my relationship with my dad is not glorious or glamorous. It's the story of a father and a daughter who, against all odds, became the best of friends when they needed each other most. And who in their last years together learned to surrender to the sea of acceptance that existed between them and to find true love within it. It's the story of flesh and blood, bones and bone marrow, and it's real and broken, and I think that's what makes it beautiful. The story may not be shiny, but I think it's bright. It's like looking at the sky on the first day of summer.
Now welcome Robert's son.
Hi, can you guys hear me? I'm Zach. Given that you've met my family, I just introduce myself generally as the son. My father was a man of contradictions. That's what made him so compelling. He was 60% honey and 40% horseradish. He would go into hysterics over a misplaced can opener, but navigated the most dire emergencies with the measured voice and steady hand of a sea captain. He lived in a space between brute force and deathless sensitivity, between meticulous planning and impulsive action, between Eisenhower-era traditionalism and post-Kennedy revolution. It fits, then, that the only thing I feel more strongly today than his absence is his presence. My father held an amazing amount of power. Whole galaxies swirled within him. That's why he had to be so tall. It was indescribably awful to watch that power fade over these last few months. Seeing the luckiest man I knew, someone so dedicated to expansion and forward motion, be confined first to an apartment, then to a bed, and, in those horrible last days, his own body. Yet it is said that when something dies, its power is released. And my father, in death, as in life, gave all that he had to his family. Faced with the loss of our coach, we banded together as the best versions of ourselves to become more than a collection of relatives. We became a team. Each of us put aside our stresses, our perceived weaknesses, our oldest insecurities to return the gift of love to the man who, for so long, had held us all together. I watched each of us reach inside ourselves to pull out a long-forgotten spark and coax it patiently into a fire. And I watched as that fire blazed brighter than any street lamp or sunset to guide my father on his journey home, safe in the certainty that we could steer our ship without him. Today I see the best parts of him. I see his power in all of us. In my Uncle Larry, I see my dad's self-reliance and undying appreciation for beauty. In Uncle Richard, his gift of observation and sense of humor. In Aunt Joyce, I lost my place. In Aunt Joyce, I see his commitment to Judaism and the power of faith to steer beleaguered people through tough times. Peter and Mike, I no longer think of you two as my brother-in-laws. I consider you both to be my actual big brothers, and you're just as good in that role as my dad was. In my mom, I see his strength. Mom, you've anchored this family through our greatest trial with grace. You've faced some of this world's most brutal hardships and have emerged more radiant and purposeful each time. I look at you and I see a phoenix. Rebecca, in you I see Dad's gentle side, his center of calm. Your kindness radiates through your whole household. It is a peaceful oasis in the heart of the world's loudest city. In Molly, I see Dad's capability, his business sense, his problem-solving acumen. Very few people in this world can both walk and fly with such ease. In Roxy, I see his intelligence, and in Simon, his exuberance. And both of you got his athleticism, which, thank God, because someone in this family eventually had to get my dad's athleticism. In Sonny, I see his creativity and manual dexterity, and in Coco, his sheer force of will. Never doubt that he's still looking out for you wherever he is. He loves you very much. I myself am proud to say that, finally, I hold my father's courage. He trained me from a very young age to take care of this family when he wasn't around. I know that you are all more than equipped to take care of yourselves, but I'm still prepared to step into my father's shoes as the man in this world who loves you all the most. And if that no longer scares me, nothing can ever scare me again.
Now welcome Robert's wife, Ellen.
I just see your familiar faces. Very heartening. Well, my husband, Robert, a.k.a. Robbie Baskin, was a charismatic, creative, colorful, complicated man who cared deeply about people and the various communities in which he participated. It's already been said he was both elegant and earthy, cowboy and gentleman, grounded and cerebral. He lived his life with a noble grace and an impeccable moral compass. These words from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar are apt and comforting. His life was gentle, and the elements so well mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man. And I'd like to read a poem for Maya Angelou. Called When Great Trees Fall. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder, lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil in silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly. Our eyes briefly see with a hurtful clarity. Our memory suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on kind words unsaid, promised words never taken. Great souls die. and our reality, bound to them, takes leave of us. Our souls, dependent upon their nurture, now shrink, wizen. Our minds, formed and informed by their radiance, fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period, peace comes, slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they existed, we can be and be better, for they existed.
Robert was a man whose physical stature was only surpassed by the stature of his spirit. When we would invoke him and bring his presence close to us, we should act as he acted, adopting a humble spirit, having an outdoor adventure, surrounding ourselves with family. When we do those things, then we will, as Robert did, repair a part of this broken world that we find ourselves in. We take a few moments for silent prayers of remembrance. Welcome Lev Friedman back to the Bima to lead us in El Malei Rachamim. I invite the congregation to please rise.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Robert Baskin Rosen, who has entered eternity. God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence in the shadow of the wings of your Shekhinah, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. Let us say, Amen.
You may be seated. Thank you to everyone to what was a very, very beautiful and meaningful tribute. This concludes the synagogue portion of our service today. Interment will be for family at West Lawn Cemetery. The address is on the inside of your service folders. If you did not receive one, we have more that you can take on your way out. The address of West Lawn is 7801 West Montrose. It is in Norridge, Illinois. If you are joining us at the cemetery, there will not be a procession. We will meet at the front gate near the office of West Lawn Cemetery as close to 1:30 as possible. Please bring your memorial pamphlets with you as they will be helpful to follow along with various prayers that will be said at the cemetery. On the front of your pamphlets is Shiva information. The family of Robert Baskin Rosen will be sitting Shiva at the Rosen residence at 2314 North Lincoln Park West, apartment 27 in Chicago. They will be sitting today from 4 to 8 p.m., Friday from 12 to 3 p.m., and Saturday from 3 to 9 p.m. Donations in Robert's honor may be made to the MPN Research Foundation, a place that is near and dear to the Rosen family's heart, being that Robert was the founder of such a worthy organization. The following individuals have been asked to have the honor to serve as pallbearers: Zachary Rosen, Richard Rosen, Larry Rosen, Peter Shapiro, and Mike Guy. Please rise at this time in silent prayer and keep your favorite memory of Robert in mind as we escort him on his final journey. Pallbearers, please step forward and escort behind.
Yes,